I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Board of Commissioners on Friday, May 24th. It is 2:05 PM in the afternoon. The purpose of the special meeting is to conduct business relative to agave. And I'd like to have I'd like to have roll call. We'll also have the record show that present are Commissioner Sheffer, Commissioner Caluzzi, Commissioner Schlosser, Commissioner Dick Byrne, and Commissioner Stan Mills. Also in attendance is Glenn Mendalis, representing the Board of Commissioners, and City Manager Sharon Lynn. Before we consider going to executive session, I'd like to have Glenn explain the purpose for the executive session.
Sure. And the only thing I wanted to mention, just so for members of the public and anybody watching, is since we last met, or you all last met, to consider the license agreement for Agave, Agave has retained additional counsel who I've been in communication with, and I have some supporting documents based upon some claims that they think they may have, and I think it's appropriate that you talk about those in executive session now rather than before something gets further down the road, is all.
So with that, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session to receive legal advice and opinion from the city solicitor as permitted by Title 29, Delaware C 10,004B4, which is the Freedom of Information Act.
I so move.
What? What?
For the purpose of everybody, because originally it was quoted as Delaware 20. And I appreciate the chair recognizing that, but you should say why, please.
You just did, thank you. We have a motion.
I so move the
Second.
City
have
of
a
Rehoboth Beach
motion.
City Commissioners go into executive session.
We have a motion and seconded to go into executive session. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. And so we will be adjourning to executive session.
We don't know how long they'll be. If anybody really wants to see
I'd like a motion to come out of executive session back into public session.
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and seconded to come out of executive session back into public session. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, and we are back in public session. What I'd like to do to start off is just read a very quick history. I'm trying to make it very generic for the layperson who's watching or members of the public here. The history of Agave is December 21st, 2018. We held our first permit of compliance hearing. That hearing was beyond the standard public permit of compliance hearing because it integrated not just the permit of compliance application with the request for but also a request for a license agreement to put one trash enclosure and one propane tank enclosure on public land behind the alley, behind the building. The permit of compliance was approved after much discussion focused on the license agreements and with the understanding that with approval of the permit of compliance, the license agreements would be looked at as favorably unless something substantial arose. Although at that time no formal license agreement was executed, such formal license agreements were to be formalized at a future meeting. That ended that meeting. On March 15, 2019, the Board of Commissioners held a meeting to consider formal issuance of the license agreements, now for 2 trash enclosures and 1 propane tank enclosure. Before discussions concluded, the applicant withdrew the license agreement request, ending the discussion, and any pending votes were deferred. On April 24th, 2019, license agreements were again on the Board of Commissioners meeting agenda. And that meeting concluded in a 4-2 vote against issuance of the license agreements. May 24th, today, we have renewed discussion and possible reconsideration of issuing license agreements that were previously denied. At this point, we're going to go to item number B, discuss and consider approval of a license agreement between the city and essentially Agave, or is that the property owner, 232 Rehoboth Avenue LLC,
Property
to
owner.
license the encroachment of 2 dumpster enclosures and a propane cage in the right-of-way along the southern boundary of the property. Do you want to make any comments on our broad
Sure, I'd be happy to.
discussions of license agreements that were not specific to Agave, but the license agreement topic?
Right, so you know, we've talked before about how the city from time to time has entered into these license agreements. They typically were for things that existed in the city for a long time, and the city wanted to recognize those encroachments, whether they be retaining walls or overhangs over the city sidewalk. Recently, you've had a couple come before you that caused you to go through a mental exercise as to when are license agreements appropriate. You had one at 45 and 45 and a half Lake for parking spots that arguably had been there for some time, but it was a little bit different than a typical encroachment. So that agreement you considered, and then you had this one that actually came before the 45 and 45 and a half license agreement. But those 2, I think, inspired you to consider license agreements more broadly. You did have a meeting, I forget the date now of that meeting, but one of the things that I came away with in that meeting, and I think I represented it in the public forum, is that the group of commissioners seemed to have consensus, and I don't believe Commissioner Schlosser was there at the time. The group of commissioners seemed to have consensus that you did not want to consider any future license agreements for the use of public property for a private use, certainly not for gaining a code compliance issue. So the policy going forward is pretty clear that unless there's some significant reason why it should come to you, if it's a private use on public property, generally that's not something that you have an appetite for. So I just want to put that in the context of the broader discussion.
Just for the
because-
record, that's not this commissioner's perspective
Right.
or agreement, but I guess if there was a discussion and that's what you came away with, so be it, but that's just not my perspective. I just want to state that for the
The
record.
consensus of that meeting.
Yes, okay.
And I think license agreements are continuing to be discussed. But one of the reasons I wanted to mention it is because depending on which way you vote, if you decide to vote on this license agreement today, I don't want this record to be unclear. I want it to be clear that this is a very unique situation. You've since considered more broadly license agreements, so I don't want this decision, whichever way it goes, to be used as precedential value for some other project that might come forward and request the same sort of a license agreement. And that's all I wanted to put on the record. for
Thank you very
clarity.
much. Thank you very much. At this point, I'll open it up to the commissioners, and then when you're satisfied, we'll open it up to the public, see if anybody here wants to talk, and then we'll come back to the commissioners. Anything up here?
I haven't changed my perspective since the meeting where we voted, where the commissioners voted to disallow, the license agreement. I mean, to me, it's to have a pretty simple mind. Okay, I really do, and it's a simple way of thinking of things, and what's fair and equitable. And I haven't changed my perspective that the fair and equitable approach here, even with the additional information that's been provided prior to our vote and since our vote, it's only underscored for me the fact that to be fair and equitable, quite frankly, this license agreement should be granted, and I haven't changed my perspective. In fact, it's only gotten stronger with the additional information we've been provided over the past few weeks. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just like to say that what I've discovered personally in getting involved in some of these discussions is that nothing's as easy as it appears on the surface. And I think it's really important for us to, as we consider a broader, more general enforcement of existing ordinances and, being more clear and more transparent going forward, we need to continue to look at each one of these situations on its own merits and on the facts and circumstances that pertain to that individual request for a license. I also think, in the interest of fairness and being equitable, in the numerous times that I've walked up and down that alleyway, it seems to me that we would be singling the Agave folks out while we continue to allow similar type behavior to continue, even under ordinances that appear, at least from my understanding, to not be in complete compliance. And so I would, that's pretty much what I want to say, but I'm prepared to go forward with looking at the facts and circumstances as they pertain to the immediate situation as we continue to explore ways we can be better across the board.
Anybody else? I'd like to start off by saying, first of all, I uphold all my statements made in the two license meetings. I was pretty adamant about my feelings. I uphold those. In the permit of compliance, I mentioned a willingness to overlook the dumpsters, which surprised me, but when I watched the videotape, that I was okay with it, per the application that was submitted in front of us. One of the things that I think is important to reiterate is especially if you watch the meeting of the permit of compliance, multiple times it indicates this type of thing. This is a quote that I did on my own little transcript, so it's fairly close. Glenn says, "I will say that the record is clear enough and that there is the expectation on their part, Agave's part, that there will be a license agreement that is prepared and adopted by you all. It would have to be something substantial to arise to cause you not to adopt it." And that's what I'm stuck on, that to me, something substantial did arise. One of the things was that they're asking for not one trash enclosure, but two, and I don't think that's major at all. However, we did find out at that hearing that a second set of zoning compliant or compliant drawings and plans were provided that established that the dumpsters and the propane tanks can fit on their property. And so that's my point that I keep gravitating back to for this, and my vote, however this goes, will probably reflect that. Is there anything else? If not, would any member of the public like to say anything? We'd like to try to keep it to 3 minutes to control everybody that's here. On it. Is that on?
Jan Conacy, 42 Oak Avenue. I think I've expressed very strongly what I feel about this in letters to you all twice. I will point out again, though, that Agave is not anything like Summer House, Dos Locos, Cuvée Ray. Those are existing buildings built a long, long time ago. I mean, I've been in Rehoboth since the early 70s, and they were there then. So they're existing buildings. We didn't have room to put dumpsters and propane. They went into existing buildings. That's a whole different situation. And just like when you grandfather the corner of a building or the corner of a step and you give them a license on city property because the building is a long-term existing building. Fair and equitable would be treating Agave like all new construction in this city. Fair and equitable means new construction follows the code. That's it. I follow the code, you follow the code when you built your house, we all follow the code in new construction. We may buy an existing house, and that house may have encroachments. Well, you're not going to make me tear it down just because we changed ownership. You're going to allow me to keep the encroachment and keep the license if there was one. That's how we work in this city. We have a code, we need to abide by the code. Do I think the code is lousy in places? Absolutely. But that's not what we're here today for. We're here today to say, can somebody with new construction put their crap, and that's exactly what it is, in the city street? That is not an alley, as people have pointed out to me. It is Wilmington Avenue. I didn't even know it had a name till all this started. And it's a mess. And if you've walked behind it, you've seen it. And the last meeting, when this was settled, because this is the other thing I noticed. We think things are settled, only they're not. They keep coming back again and again and again for no reason. So we settled it. It was going to be beautified. We're going to get Summer House and the other places to kind of fix up their back. And now we have Agave. And as I said in my letter, I can't imagine Keith Fitzgerald coming in here and throwing a fit like that man did. It was embarrassing to see an adult behave like that. That's the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan.
Walter Birmingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. I think the first thing is a question. Is what we're talking about here the same license that you had beforehand, identical?
Here's the April 16, 2019 draft, which is the one that was considered at the last meeting that was voted down.
And it's not been changed?
It has not been changed.
Thank you. I'll be very short. I found more information. May or may not help you in your deliberations. We're not entitled to some of this, but in talking with the city's building inspector last week, I asked, do we still have 2 sets of plans that have been submitted to the city of Rehoboth for approval? And he said, yes. I said, as of 2 o'clock Friday today, this time, will you have finished the review of those plans? He said, no. He also made a statement, which may or may not be true, that it's a certificate of compliance. It's got to do with liquor and not a building. I don't know that to be perfect one way or the other. I'll also tell you, I went to the fire marshal's office in Georgetown and talked to a technician there. Her name is Desiree. She's quite qualified. I worked with her on other items on construction. And I was informed that the plans that were submitted by Agave and/or company were approved as submitted. And I said, was there a fire marshal's letter issued also? That is, the comments, they go with the plans that were submitted. She said, yes. And I said, may I have a copy of them? And she said, no. And she said, you might talk with the building inspector, but the basis there was the city of Rehoboth does not get a copy of them either. Somewhere along the line, I've heard about a possible alley or a place to put some of the tanks, et cetera. Fire marshal's out of town, her supervisor's out of town. I explained for you, but I also told her I appreciated the fact that she worked for her board and she was not allowed to release it. You might have time on the subpoena powers, but I don't. I could get those plans, but I have a good idea what they need to look like. And what happens is, as I said the last time I spoke up here, they come out and inspect the premise, and if it doesn't meet the requirements, they turn it down. They don't get an occupancy in other than very unusual circumstances. And they're very unusual. Maybe a exit light doesn't have a bulb in it or something minor. But there's no plans for the city building inspector to approve. They can go out and build the whole building and come up for final inspection and then get denied or have all kinds of pressure put on it and everything. And the city doesn't need to be further involved in the aggravation, my word. Legislative process was not followed here. This should never be the subject now. The building permits should have been issued first before they went out for the certificate of compliance. And since that information is not available at this time, and I did not try to sabotage you, the area of the state that functions with this is closed this afternoon or maybe all day. I tried to get the information to give you the best information that I could get and that you needed to make a decision. But you, in my professional opinion, do not have enough information to be giving a lease for something that you know nothing about. You don't have the details, and it needs to stop, and if necessary, ask the fire marshal's office to come here and testify before you. And in reality, you should never be having this without them being here or having canceled the meeting for lack of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Anybody else? Like your name and,
Excuse me, Bill Onifrychuk, we're at 203 Laurel. I know a little bit about this case, just talking to neighbors and friends and things like that. And I'm just going to go back to the point of fair and equitable that has been brought up. I know the Agave people a little bit, and I know they spent a lot of money to work on additional plans and whatever you go through when you're in that business, based on what they were told December 21st, I think it is. And, you know, it's how good is your word? I guess that's what I would say. So anyway, thank you.
thank you, Bill. If there's nobody else, we'll turn it back to the commissioners for additional discussion and a motion if you like.
Commissioner Mills, I'm prepared to make a motion to, for the City of Rehoboth Commissioners to authorize execution of the license agreement as it was presented on April 16th, 2019. If that needs to,
Can I correct that? So
Yeah,
it
sure.
was actually presented on April 24th, but the draft version is dated April 16, 2019.
thank you for the correction. And I'll have some supportive comments to make once there's a second we can discuss.
Second.
All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second to adopt or execute a license agreement between the city and the 232 Rehoboth Avenue LLC that was first drafted April 16th and presented to the commissioners first time April 24th. Any discussion?
Yes, thank you. I've gone back and viewed the video twice from our discussion on December 21st, 2018. And it's clear to me from listening to that discussion, listening very, very closely to that discussion, that the Agave restaurant people have acted in good faith based on the way we discussed and represented the permit of compliance that evening. And so that information to me has caused me to be supportive of moving ahead with this licensing agreement. They have spent, as this gentleman pointed out, considerable money, it appears, based on the way that we represented the permit of compliance discussion on the 21st of December. I do have a concern, and it's an aside to this, but I do have a concern about how our businesses do deal with trash and the dumpsters. And I just want to go on record to say that it's important that we that we do take a look at what the code is for the future, that we do figure out how to enforce screening and dressing up those places so they're not trashy looking. I also think that it's important as we go forward in the months ahead that we do take a look at the licensing process to make sure that as a city we're consistent in how we're dealing with that. We're fair. We're transparent, and so I think those things can fall into place as we move ahead. But I support this specific license agreement as it was drafted on August 16th, 2019.
All right, we're in the
Yeah.
middle of discussion before we conduct the vote. Anybody
Right.
else?
So I'd like to make some comments. I will say from also watching and listening to that meeting, the permit of compliance meeting, it was clear to me that we were all very supportive of Agave coming in, and we were all very supportive. If you listen to it, the city solicitor had said that there was a consensus to move forward with license agreement for Agave. And for us to turn around and say, no, I find it difficult. However, one of the things in the very next meeting, or the first meeting for the license agreement, where Mr. Ferretti asked that we pull the license, or the possibility of approving or disapproving the license agreement. I had asked them, be a good neighbor and do the right thing, and they did come up with a plan. And I was very happy with that, because after about a week, I went to see the city building official, and I thought, great. But then, again, they came back and wanted to put the dumpsters on city property. So they didn't, in my opinion, do the right thing. However, I feel that we certainly let them know that we were going to approve a license agreement to move forward. And I think we need to be fair about that. It's how we get a bad name as doing business with the city. I hear oftentimes how difficult people find it. It's probably not all the time, but there are times that they say that the city says one thing and, it's just becomes problematic. And I could see this would be another tick against us by saying, oh yeah, we're going to go forward with the license agreement. And there was a consensus to do so, and then for us to turn around and say, and not. So at this point, although I'm disappointed, I will support it in fairness to approve this license agreement.
Anybody else? Well, I would like to, I guess, finish up before we conduct a vote and just say, I agree. When you listen to the tape, it looks like we certainly led them on, that it was a done deal. However, I can't get it out of my mind that we said as a caveat that unless something significant comes up, and I cannot let go that, I believe, when we learned that they submitted a plan that shows that they can conduct business with their dumpsters and their propane tanks entirely on their property, that was a deal changer for me, and that we ought to go back and enforce that. My hope all along has been that especially after Commissioner Cluzy said, can't you be a good community partner, essentially, that they would do that. And I still have that hope that even after our actions today, that they would become a good community partner, because I've got other, we have other restaurants and businesses approaching us saying, why do these people get special treatment, et cetera. So again, my hope is that they will become a good community partner. Absent that, if they want to make their entrance and with special treatment and special favor above and beyond what other restaurants get, then so be it. I just happen to disagree with it. And I'm comfortable with my change of position from the original permit of compliance, and I'm willing to defend the lawsuit for what I believe is the proper way to go on this. So with that, we'll do a roll call vote. Then remember, the motion on the floor is to approve the license agreement before us in the amount of $177 annual fee, correct? And Commissioner Sheffer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Calusi?
Aye, for the reasons I stated.
Commissioner Schlosser?
Aye, for the reason of the discussion on December 21st. That's where the fair and equitable comes into me in that tape, in that discussion. Clearly, we gave Agave and their partners the go-ahead. I can't say it better than Bill did, quite frankly. And in good faith, they went forward, and it looks like, based on information we've received, they've invested in engineers and architects and design and everything else based on our word as the government, as the approving body. So my position hasn't changed since December 21st. I do have to somewhat disagree with my colleagues in that I actually do think they've tried to be a good community partner. I am sorry for what happened at the meeting. I wasn't there to see exactly what occurred in the March meeting, and I did, but I wasn't there. I mean, so I couldn't feel the full effect. But I have confidence that they will continue to be a good community partner, an even better community partner going forward. Therefore, I am voting aye.
All right, and Commissioner Byrne, I'm sorry.
Aye, for the reasons I've stated. Thank you.
All right, and the chair votes no for the reasons stated earlier. With that, the motion carries and the license agreement is approved to be executed. I see no other business. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.